All right, welcome to a very special episode of the Ari Lewis Show with the world famous and internationally famous Yaakov Fauci, a.k.a. Jacob from Long Island. Would you rather I call you Yaakov for this interview?
Yes.
Okay. One of the reasons I wanted to come out of retirement and interview is because there's a lot of misnomers about the Vice interview that you gave and the viral videos that have been going out throughout the world regarding you. So I wanted to do an interview with you in a long format. This way there cannot be edits or yellow journalism, as we discussed. So first, let's talk on that particular issue. I know you felt the Vice interview was fair. They only took about 2 minutes. You gave a 30-minute interview to them. But you're more, I guess, disturbed about the yellow journalism tactics that's gone on since that video?
Before that video.
Even before that
led
video.
up to that video.
Well, give us some examples.
For example, that famous video that first went viral was not an interview. It was not supposed to be filmed even. What happened is that I saw my neighbor was about to spray paint my wall. He was shaking up a can of spray paint in my yard. I was in my pajamas. I was not dressed clearly from that video. And I ran outside to stop him from graffitiing the wall. And basically an argument ensued with the neighbors that they happened to be filming at the time. And I think it ended up on some Turkish television or something else. And then from that whole long argument where there was a whole dialogue between me and the neighbors, some unscrupulous person took out one line and took it completely, grossly out of context to make it sound like I admitted I was, so to speak, stealing their houses.
And you occupy their territories.
Yes. When it was very clear, even if you watch the original interview on Turkish TV or whatever it was, TRT I believe it was, I'm not familiar with the network, but I think it was Arabic Turkish TV, that it was very, very clear from the context of the entire discussion exactly what I meant and exactly what the point was, and I admitted to nothing of the sort. So now the entire world is trying to say, oh, you see, he's admitting that he's a thief, he's admitting that Israel is stealing houses, when it was completely, exactly the opposite. And this is not even journalism. This is propaganda. It's taking something, deliberately causing a provocation, filming it when I said I don't want to be on camera, when I said I don't want to speak to them. Several times they asked me for an interview, I told them I don't want to speak to you, I don't want to have an interview. And they provoked me into saying something that was very easily taken out of context, and then they made it viral and spread it around the whole world as if I'm now somehow the spokesman of the neighborhood of Israel. Of anyone, I'm not a spokesman for anybody.
Another clarification point. Some of the articles written about you made it sound like that you were in New York like a few months ago. Someone picked you up, an organization dropped you off, had you occupy this person's house. But in actuality, correct me if I'm wrong, you've lived in Israel almost 20 years. Right?
I've lived in Israel for over 20 years.
Over 20 years.
I've been in this specific house for 10 years. This is not a new concept. They were evicted from at least the extension of the house where I live many, many years ago, probably over 20 years ago. It was sealed off for a while, then at some point the courts gave us permission to inhabit it. But again, this is not a new concept, this is not a new thing. I did not come from New York, from some settler organization, to come occupy a house. I was already living in Israel for many years before this. And again, there were other people living in the house before me. At the time, it was a bunch of yeshiva students, mostly at the Mir Yeshiva and other places that were staying there because they wanted to strengthen the neighborhood and they wanted to strengthen the Jewish presence in the neighborhood. And again, this is complete, I wouldn't even call it yellow journalism. It's lies and propaganda. Also, to say that settlers from Brooklyn, I'm not from Brooklyn, but fine, that are coming and occupying, I'm the only American, I believe, that has ever lived in that neighborhood, and I'm the only competent English speaker that lives in that neighborhood currently. So that's the reason my face is on TV so much, because I'm the only one who can talk to them. And even I don't like to talk to them most of the time. But there's no Americans there, there's no conspiracy, there's no plot of Zionists from the world to come and put people from Brooklyn in the houses in East Jerusalem, because it's not happening. And as I said, I'm the only American there, and I believe I'm the only American in the history of the neighborhood that's ever lived there.
And there's some misnomers about this particular neighborhood. Of course, the neighborhood speaking about the Sheikh Jarrah.
Shimon Hatzadik. They
Shimon
call it
Hatzadik,
Sheikh Jarrah.
correct.
We call it Shimon Hatzadik, and it's important. There was a Knesset member recently, I forget his name, from the Noam Party, who said language is very important. And we need to call it Sheikh Jarrah. It's another neighborhood. It was near that, but it's become like enveloped in it. This was
So an alias to Shimon Hatzadik
Sheikh
is that
Jarrah,
name.
yes.
Okay. So
But
first
words
of all,
matter. Names matter.
sure, you're right. So first of all, it's my understanding that even a few years ago, there were some residents in the neighborhood, Arab residents, that were offered money to leave.
First of all, this is a long process. We need to explain the whole situation, what happened here. That this property was purchased by several Jewish organizations under the auspices of the chief rabbi, Rabbi Ashkenazi, who was the Sephardi chief rabbi, go figure. But that's how it works. So he went to pray at Shimon Hatzadik in the late 1800s, and there was an Arab that was at the entrance that was taking bakshish. He wanted admission fee to go and pray in Shimon Hatzadik. So the rabbi decided that this was unacceptable, so he raised money from all over the world, and he purchased the kever of Shimon Hatzadik, the tomb of Shimon Hatzadik, and 19 dunams of land that were around Shimon Hatzadik. It was purchased in 1875 by two Jewish organizations. And again, this was purchased according to the Turkish records. You can see this, and that's why the Israeli courts eventually returned this property to the Jewish owners, because it was so unequivocally a sale that there was no grounds here for occupation. So we have to understand that this land has been, first of all, it's been Jewish for thousands of years, because Shimon Hatzadik, who was Shimon Hatzadik? We'll get to that later, but Shimon Hatzadik was a high priest in the Second Temple. He's mentioned in the Mishnah, he's mentioned in the Talmud. So we're talking about somebody that's not from 50 years ago. This is someone that goes way back to the earliest periods of Jewish history. And if he's buried there, and there's a Sanhedrin cave there, there's a mini Sanhedrin cave next to there, which means that this is at least 2,000 years of Jewish history in this neighborhood, at the very, very least.
So again, this is the Ari Lewis Show, special guest Yaakov Fauci. I wanted to ask you, since this video has come out with Vice, the other videos, have you gotten death threats or any other nasty type of threats? Anything of that sort?
I mean, I'm getting constantly bombarded. Somebody, I think I know who it was, but I'm not going to say because I don't know for sure, posted my phone number online. And I've been getting hundreds of phone calls, and my WhatsApp got canceled because of this, and they won't tell me why, but basically I was getting bombarded with thousands of WhatsApp messages from Egypt, from Jordan, from Qatar, from Dubai, from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from countries I've never even, Bahrain, countries I've never even heard of, and countries I probably don't want to hear of. And basically I have an alphabet soup of the entire country, the entire Arab world, who are sending me, some of them are just sending me, look, get out of the house, you're a thief. Others are cursing and sending disgusting, vulgar things. Some people are sending outright threats, we're going to kill you, we're going to murder you, we're going to send Hamas to get you, we're going to send pictures of...
That sounds like death threats to me.
Oh, it's complete death threats. But from all over the world. We're talking about they have made me this face now of Zionist occupation, so to speak. And they basically... They put the entire aggression of the entire Arab world onto me. To the point where my WhatsApp account was canceled. And I'm currently in a lawsuit with Itamar Ben-Gvir to get my account back because they banned about 30 right-wing activists from WhatsApp last week. And I think I was just collateral damage in this because it was the next day, and it could be I was just bombarded. It was they thought it was a denial of service attack or something. I waited to get back to hear from them. Hopefully it's sorted out. But no, that's one example of what they did. They broke my locks of my house. When 2 weeks ago I was away for Shabbos, I came back on Saturday night, and I couldn't get into my thing because they deliberately broken my lock. I don't know whether they tried to pry it open or they just stuck in whatever. Kids used to do that as well. They just stick toothpicks or whatever and crazy glue into locks, and then it destroys the lock. So I had to bring a locksmith in and to break open the lock and to change my lock. And every time we're walking through the neighborhood, there's just mobs of Arabs there that are rude and that they curse and they say disgusting things, and they're not. It's a very, very unfriendly environment. So yes, definitely it's leading to threats, and there's a real chance it could lead to violence. My neighbors' houses, I was lucky. My neighbors' houses were under a constant bombardment of rocks and bottles and fireworks. People were assaulted. My neighbor had a bottle broken over his head. My neighbor down the block had one car of his burned, and another car that came to visit him was just torched. Just telling me this is in Jerusalem, 5 minutes from police headquarters. And this is not in some backwoods neighborhood in the middle of Shrem or in who knows where. This is in Jerusalem, 5 minutes from police headquarters, next to major hotels, next to 20 minutes from the Kotel, from the old city. So again, there's complete anarchy now. The police have seemed to have gotten things more under control, or things have just calmed down. But no, it really is. It was a very, very bad situation, and they're deliberately causing this, and they think that through intimidation tactics, this is going to cause us to leave. And again, as I said in that video, as I meant to say in that video, I'm not the right address for this. They can harass me all they want. They can do whatever they want to me. I don't decide. I'm not in charge. And if they do, by some reason, it's not going to happen. But if some miraculous reason they manage to push me out of the house, they're not going to get it back, and somebody else is going to come in the house, and then it's just going to escalate the situation even worse. So they're focusing all of their energy and all their attention on me, which I'm glad they're doing, because it's taking away the attention from the real places where they can actually potentially help themselves, and it's just causing them to waste all of their time and their energy on childish nonsense and intimidation tactics.
That's part of the reason we're actually filming this interview in a secret location, not in a studio, because partly for your safety. Again, this is a very serious issue. And getting back to, you were talking about all this nastiness that's come at you, are you still happy you gave the interview in retrospect? Hindsight's 20/20, obviously, but are you still happy you did that, considering everything that's come at your way since then?
Again, the Vice interview I had no problem with giving. I don't think they portrayed me specifically in a negative light, but we're talking about the original interview was not an interview, as I said. They ambushed me with cameras when I was in my pajamas, when I came outside to prevent my neighbor from graffitiing my wall. And again, this is not journalism. This is not the way things are done. If you want to have an interview, you want to have a debate, you want to have a head-to-head, you bring cameras, you tell both, you don't ambush people and get them to come outside and then argue with them until they say something that can be taken out of context. So that I absolutely regret, because it was not what I meant, and it was not what I said, and they just completely distorted it. The actual interviews I have given, so far I haven't seen one that's been distorted or cut too bad, but you have to understand, the entire media, basically from top to bottom, worldwide media, including the Israeli media, is very, very dead set against us. They're very biased. They have a very, very clear agenda. And they're not coming to report facts. They're coming to show how the Jews here are the Zionist oppressors, and how the Arabs are the victims, and how we're throwing them out of their houses unjustifiably, and they're completely ignoring all of the actual facts and complexities of this issue, and it's not really like that at all. They're also trying to make it out as if it's some sort of Israel versus Palestinian issue, when this has nothing to do with Israel, this has nothing to do with the Israeli government, this has nothing to do with the policies of the Israeli government. This is a private land dispute between two people, or two organizations, whatever it is, two private bodies. This has nothing to do with the Israeli government. The Israeli government is just enforcing the laws of the state of Israel, and probably international law. We'll talk more about international law later, but according to international law, this property was purchased by Jews legally, and they have the right to give it to whoever they want later on in descendants. It was legally transferred to the current owners. And there's nothing to be discussed here. They're turning this into some sort of international issue when it's not supposed to be. It's a very, very simple land dispute.
One of the things also, I'm very appreciative of your time, because I think people saw that interview on Vice and other places and said, well, Yaakov, why didn't you just say this? Why did you say that? Well, you gave a 30-minute interview. They cut it down to 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. And even then, easier said than done. Like, you're trying to take a big issue, put it on your shoulders, try to express to the whole world, and it's hard when things get chopped up. It's hard when things get deleted.
Not only that, it's also when the interviewers are clearly biased and hostile, even with their questions. That you can't, you're lucky you can get a word in edgewise. And normally I would not even speak to such outlets as Vice or any of it. Vice is not even. They're all the same. It doesn't matter whether it's Vice, whether it's CNN, whether it's the Associated Press, whether it's Reuters, whether it's England, BBC. They're all the same, and they're all garbage, and they're all propaganda machines that are trying to send a very, very clear message and agenda. And again, I'm actually upset there was no real right-wing news that came and is really covering this story. I haven't seen one representative of any of these networks that are fair and normal and actually want to present a normal picture, of unbalanced picture, of unbiased picture about what's going on there. They're just not there. It's all European networks and Arab networks and Vice and people who their sole goal there is to besmirch Israel and to make Israel look bad in the international press.
As part of, again, we're doing this interview, we want to give a different side, different perspective. Talk a bit about Shimon Hatzadik, because as you mentioned, a major figure in Jewish history. That's what the neighborhood is named after, this gentleman. And even he may have had some influence on Christianity as well, is my understanding. But tell us more about Shimon Hatzadik.
Okay, so Shimon Hatzadik was one of the last high priests in the Second Temple period. It's mentioned that he had a whole incident with Alexander the Great, where there were certain people who went and went to the Greeks and said that we were rebelling and the Jews were rebelling, and Alexander the Great came with his whole army to destroy the Jewish people in Israel. And Shimon Hatzadik went out in his clothes, in his Kohen Gadol outfit, which is generally not allowed, but to save the Jewish people, you can take certain leeways sometimes. So he went out in his whole Kohen Gadol outfit. He went to meet Alexander the Great. And when Alexander the Great saw him, he got off his horse and he bowed down to him. So everyone's like, what's going on here? What is this going on? So Alexander the Great said that every time I go into battle, if I see a vision of this man the night before the battle, I know I'm always going to be victorious. And this is that guy. So if that's the guy who I'm seeing now, there's no way I can destroy him, and I can destroy him, and the Jewish people were saved. And because of that, he wanted to put he saved the Jewish people, and because of that, he wanted to put a statue of himself in the temple. And obviously that's not acceptable under Jewish law to have statues of anything or anyone in the temple or anywhere else. So he made a compromise, and he said for the next year, every male son will be named Alexander. So to this day, there are Jews that are named Alexander. There are Jews named Sender in Yiddish. And that comes from way back then, that Jews are named Alexander in deference to Alexander the Great, that he decided to spare the Jewish people and the merit of Shimon Hatzadik. And again, Shimon Hatzadik is also mentioned in the Mishnah. He's mentioned in Pirkei Avot. He's mentioned in other places in the Mishnah, in famous teachings. So we're talking about this is a person who was very, very influential in Israel, in Jewish law, in Jewish religious practice, 2,000 years ago already, and he's buried in this neighborhood. This is his tomb, traditionally. And not only that, even if this wasn't the tomb of Shimon Hatzadik, there's a mini Sanhedrin cave where members of the Sanhedrin of that time were buried there, and that's undisputed archaeologically or anything else. So They know that the sarcophagi are in the British Museum. They stole everything and just left the bones. That's another story, not for now. But they pillaged the graves and just left the bones, and they had to be reburied in the tomb of Shimon Hatzadik. And if anyone wants to go, you go to England to the British Museum, and you can see the original sarcophagi from these Sanhedrin caves that were 2,000 years old, burial ground for Jews. So it's very, very important that Jews be in this neighborhood. People have to understand that Shimon Hatzadik is a place where hundreds of people, sometimes thousands of people come every day to pray. Morning, noon, and night, there's people there. There's 2 kollels, as far as I know, maybe more, that are learning Torah full time there. People make family simchas there. They make haircuts for their sons. They make bris. They make all sorts of things in Shimon Hatzadik. And families come, especially on Shabbos, with baby carriages. Women are wheeling their kids, and they're coming to pray and visit the tomb of Shimon Hatzadik. And it's only because of the Jewish presence in this neighborhood. It's only because crazy people like me and like us have decided to take up root in this neighborhood and live in this neighborhood, that there's free access for Jews that want to come and pray. And we just had Lag BaOmer. There were tens of thousands of Jews there. On the yard side of Shimon Hatzadik, which is after the holidays in Tishrei, after Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, it's right at the end of that month. Sometimes there are tens of thousands. We've had up to 40, 50,000 people who visited that site in one day, in one night. So we're not talking about something that's fringe, that's on the side. This is a very, very important Jewish site. And the fact that we did buy this neighborhood with money so long ago, in the 1870s, is all the more reason that we should have the right to be there. This is not a settlement. And again, I want to say this, and people are saying this, I've said this a lot, no one has aired this yet, I hope you guys air this, that this is not a settlement. This was land that was purchased legally, according to everybody, by Jews in 1875, and Jews had lived there at some point. Some places yes, some places no. The neighborhood above also, Nachalat Shimon, it was a Yemenite neighborhood, there was other houses there. There were people who lived in these neighborhoods, and they were expelled in 1948 by the British and the oncoming war of the Jordanian Legion and everyone else. And this is not a settlement. The squatters here, the settlers, so to speak here, again, I'm not against settlement. I don't want anyone to misconstrue this that I'm speaking against settlements. I was a settler, so to speak, for years. I believe Jews have a biblical commandment to settle the land of Israel. Settlement is not a bad word. Settler is not a bad word. It's one of the biggest mitzvahs in the Torah to settle the land of Israel. So I just want to make that clear. But anybody who is anti-settlement, anybody who thinks settlements are a bad thing, especially when it's on private land, and we hear this all the time, that the settlements are building on illegal Palestinian land, and the Supreme Court says they have to be bulldozed. So now we have a situation in Jerusalem where there are Arabs who are illegally squatting on Jewish-owned land, with the documentation, with everything. So where is the Supreme Court? Where are the outraged leftists? Why are the leftists not coming here and demanding that the Palestinians immediately get out of these houses and give it back to their rightful Jewish owners? This shows the how do you say, the cynicism, the hypocrisy of the Israeli and the international left, that here is a clear case when they should be very, very firmly on the side of the Jews in this neighborhood, because the law is on our side, the ethics is on our side, morality is on our side, because this was, again, purchased property. No one disputes that we own this property. No one disputes that this was a Jewish neighborhood. No one disputes that there's Jewish significance in this neighborhood. But because people came in 1956 and illegally squatted that land and illegally occupied our land, and again, we're talking about international law, everyone's saying that it's a war crime for Israel to forcefully displace people in land under their occupation. That's not what's happening here. That's exactly what happened in 1956 when the Jordanian government and the UN, who really should know better, come on UN, I mean if anybody knows better, it's the UN, illegally settled, so to speak, refugees on Jewish-owned land, on Jewish property. So how can this be? Could you imagine if Israelis would have, if anyone else would have done this anywhere in the world, that the UN would have settled people on disputed land, on disputed property, on places that was stolen but illegally, and nobody in the world except for England recognized the Jordanian occupation of East Jerusalem. Everything the Jordanians did in East Jerusalem from 1948 until 1967 was completely illegal according to international law, according to the United Nations. But was there one resolution that the Jordanians have to leave East Jerusalem? Was there one resolution against Jordanian settlement in Hebron and in Bethlehem and all these places? Was there one resolution against the persecution of Christians by the Muslims in all these places, in Beit Jala, in Bethlehem? As I was saying, so again, we don't hear any condemnation from the international community, from the UN. Not only do we not hear condemnation, the UN is responsible for this mess. The Jordanian government is responsible for this mess, where they illegally settled, so to speak, refugees from inside of Israel, mostly from Jaffa and from Haifa. The house I live in was built by people from Haifa that came in 1956. So again, it needs to be pointed out that the Arab presence in this neighborhood started in 1956. Not 1856, not 1756, not 56. 1956. So this is not ancestral lands. This is not their family plots. This is not their farms that their great-great-great-great-grandfathers came on a donkey and plowed. They came in 1956 because they left Israel because they were whatever. They were enemies of Israel, and they thought if they left, it would help them destroy the Jewish people, and they would be able to go back to their houses. And obviously, that plan was spoiled. So the Jordanians and the UN settled them illegally, according to international law, according to basically every law of the world of accepted practice, in Jewish-owned property in East Jerusalem in 1956. And they had no right to do that, and it was an illegal thing. And again, I understand, I genuinely believe that the Arabs that came there did so in good faith, and they didn't realize what was happening to them, and they weren't the ones here that are responsible. But if they have any claims on anybody, it's not on us, it's not on the landowners, it's not on the Israeli government, it's not on settlers from Brooklyn. It's the United Nations and the Jordanian government who are the ones that wronged them. So if they have a problem, they should go back to them. And I know both the Jordanian government and the United Nations have an abundance of money, and they're pouring in an abundance of money in the condemnation of Israel. Maybe they can find a solution where these people can live that's not on property that's owned by other people, that's not on property that's claimed by others.
Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show. Special guest, Yaakov Fauci. Yaakov, the claim was the recent war that ended a few weeks ago. The claim was by Hamas, other anti-Israel organizations, that they, in essence, started this war because of what happened in the neighborhood that you reside in. Give us more information about if that was legitimate or not, and why it expanded to a war, an entire war between, I don't want to say two countries, but between Israel and terrorists over this neighborhood that you live in.
First of all, then, what was the previous war about? It's always like people talk about, Israel has to go back to the 1967 borders, and then everything will be fine. In 1966, was there peace? In 1956, was there peace?
As I recall, the PLO started in 1964.
Exactly.
So
what do you mean? What kind of peace? Again, the people are making excuses. It was a combination of factors, actually. It was, first of all, it was Ramadan. There was the unrest by Damascus Gate on the Temple Mount, which again was started. It was unnecessary. The Arabs pray all the time on the Temple Mount. Every year is Ramadan, and there's not necessarily any unrest or any fighting with the police or any problems. So they decided, for whatever reason, now that they were ill-tempered and in a bad mood, and they decided to cause problems. And then it spiraled out of control. And because this just happened to be going on at the same time, they decided to make this like their focus, their excuse. But it's completely ridiculous. Anyone with half a brain realizes that Hamas doesn't need a reason to start wars. Hamas has been shooting missiles at us for many years. They don't need an excuse. They don't need a reason. And again, that's blaming the victim. There's no excuse. It doesn't matter what Israel does. It doesn't matter what we did. It doesn't matter what's going on. First of all, it has nothing to do with Hamas, because they're in Gaza. What does Gaza have to do with East Jerusalem? And second of all, to blow up innocent people in their houses and to wreak havoc on people's lives that are completely unrelated to this conflict. There's never any excuse for that. There's no excuse for that, and doesn't matter what was done, what wrong happened, what injustice happened. That's not an acceptable answer, and anybody who does things like that can expect it to have a very harsh response against them.
do you have any particular feeling when you see guys like Trevor Noah or John Oliver, if you watch those shows, they talk about this particular incident, do you have a feeling you're on the inside, you're in this neighborhood, you kind of know really what's going on, and you see these comedians take a political point of view, philosophical point of view? What are your particular feelings about that?
I think comedians should stick to jokes and not get involved in politics, things that they have no idea what's going on. And even if they do have any idea what's going on, that's not what gives a comedian the right. What gives a comedian the platform to start giving people political advice, giving people medical advice. People need to stay in their lanes. You want to be a comedian, tell jokes. You want to be a talk show host, have a talk show. You want to be a basketball player, play basketball. You want to be a football player, play football. No one cares what a football player has to say about world international politics. No one cares what an actor. And an actor is the fakest person that exists. The person who pretends to be things that he's not for his whole life. That's his whole job, is to pretend, is to lie, is to fake. We care what such a person says about major moral and philosophical and international issues, but who cares what these people think? The fact that they're so arrogant that they think that they have a right to an opinion because they happen to be on television on some show and because they happen to play basketball for a living, that really shows that their heads are not screwed on the right way.
So again, not to bring this up again in a sad way, but you mentioned threats you've gotten earlier, serious threats, death threats, etc. I've seen a picture of you saying, if I don't steal it, someone else will. Yes. I understand that was made by some of your friends in Jordan and sent to you, is that correct?
It wasn't made by my friends in Jordan, it was made by people in Jordan. Again, there's a bunch of memes about me now. Not only was it a viral video, now because of the viral video, there's a bunch of cartoons and memes and all sorts of... Every day people are sending me new ones. There's like I already have a whole list of them. Maybe we can link some of them in the video. You can send links to these ridiculous memes. that, like, first of all, even there was one, my favorite one so far was that it was in 1948. There were the Jewish refugees from the Holocaust were coming, and the Arabs welcomed them in with open arms and hugging them and bringing them food and water and welcome to our country, like Pocahontas or whatever it was in America, or Squanto, whatever that story was over there with the Pilgrims. And then on the bottom there's Israel Today, where the Arabs are like, please don't kick me out of my house, and then there's me, who was basically...
You're in that photo?
Yeah, I'm kicking them out of their house.
Oh.
So that's the Arabs who were the loving and welcomed the Jews with open arms, the refugees in 1948. Who anyone knows anything about 1948 and 1928 and 1929 and all of the massacres and the pogroms and everything else that was going on in Israel before 1948 knows we were not exactly having a great time over here. It was not peace, harmony, and it's not Woodstock over here. So that it just shows us their propaganda, they're absolute lies that they just distort and they lie. And so they're making it like they've been nice to us the whole time. They never did anything wrong to us. They've always been very welcoming with us. And now we're going and stabbing them in the back and going against them and throwing them out of their houses out of spite. It's just so cynical. It's disgusting. And people buy this. People listen to this. Where are all the people who say, again, you might not like Israel. You might not like what Israel's doing. You might not like Israel's settlement policy. And again, this has nothing to do with Israel's settlement policy. This is a private land dispute that was purchased long before there was a vision of a state of Israel or anything else, or an Israeli government or a Supreme Court or anything else. It's a private land dispute. But even if you don't like Israel and Israel's policies and things, where are the intellectually honest people in the world that are coming and saying this is propaganda, this is lies, this is Stalin, this is Hitler, this is Goebbels, this is not normal thing, this is not how we have a dialogue, this is not how we have a discourse, and you want to condemn and you want to protest and you want to do whatever you want, that's absolutely fine. But to resort to tactics and threats and intimidation and just complete, I wouldn't even call it yellow journalism because it's way beyond journalism, and it's like, I don't think I've ever seen such a, again, smear campaign against me. I don't know what they think they're going to accomplish. I'm actually a little bit flattered that for some reason they decided that I'm the one who can decide, and if I only called up Netanyahu and told them to get back to houses, everything would be fine. As if anyone listens to me, as if I have any legal standing, as if I have nothing to do with any of this, except that I live there.
Weren't you impressed when the Vice reporter said you're a hard man to get a hold of? Did you like that?
I'm a hard man to get a hold of because I don't want to talk to these people, because I realize that they're liars and they're frauds and they're having a clear agenda. And why would I want to give an interview to someone who I know the whole point of the video is only to make me look bad, to make my country look bad, and to make my people look like thieves and murderers? Why would I want to participate in that? Again, the only reason I even spoke to Vice, and I said that at the beginning of the video, and they did air that, was because I wanted to do some level of damage control because of that viral video, which was completely not supposed to be. Again, it was not a video, it was not an interview, it was not a news. That was not news, that was just an ambush. That was a media ambush and a complete hack job. So I decided to speak to Vice. I spoke to I spoke to the Financial Times, I don't know if they printed, I spoke to some Norwegian newspaper news. A few here and there, I do try to spread the truth a little bit and try to speak a little bit to do damage control. But yes, I don't want these reporters speaking to me, I don't want to give interviews, because I know what's going to happen. And every single time I've spoken to any major news, and that includes the Israeli media, and it's especially the Israeli media, I've been very disappointed, and that they've done a hack job, and they've done a complete hatchet job on it. So, like, why would I want to speak to these people? Why would I want to
different groups of people have equally or somewhat been unfair to you. It's not just Arabs,
basically
it's Jews
the
and
entire
Arabs.
news. It's Jews, it's Arabs, it's international community, it's so to speak journalists who are not journalists, who are propagandists, and they spread propaganda under the guise of journalism. And again, it's why would I want to be part of that? Why would anyone want to speak to people who their entire goal is to take whatever I say and spin it out of control and make me look bad? So what possible motivation would I have to speak to these people? And again, people on Facebook, a lot of people are giving me flack. You have to make a video, you have to explain, you have to try and do hasbara, you have to try and fix it. First of all, nothing I am going to say is going to fix the damage. Nothing I'm going to say is going to change anyone's mind, because people have already made up their minds. They've already decided the narrative is that they're evil Israeli settlers, or Brooklyn settlers, even worse, are coming to displace poor innocent Palestinian refugees from their homes and throw them in the streets and then eat their blood and bake the matzah or whatever else they're going to accuse us of doing. Ridiculous blood. It's a blood libel. This is a blood libel, plain and simple. And you can't fight blood libels with tax. Just like when we're saying we're baking the blood and then we're poisoning their wells and no, it's not real, it's not fake. Jews love life and Jews have... And nothing you say, nothing I say, nothing we say is going to help. So unless it's our media outlets, unless it's something that we control and we have complete control over, and we can control how it goes out and where it goes out and how it's edited and what the message is, there's absolutely no point to talk to these people. And again, it's not going to help, because it's only going to do further damage, because they're going to find a way to spin it and to cut it to make it look even worse than it really is.
I thought the Jews control the media. So
I don't know. I'm still waiting for my check from Hollywood. I haven't gotten anything yet.
Again,
No
this
George Soros, no nothing. I'm still waiting for my Rothschild bank conspiracy. I've been very disappointed. I'm still waiting for all of my what's coming to me.
Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show. Special guest Yaakov Fauci. Please bear with us. I understand it's a bit loud outside, as we mentioned. For Yaakov's security, we had to do this interview in a secure location, not a typical studio. We just couldn't take the risk. Obviously, Yaakov's got death threats, and we don't want to take a chance on risking his safety. So, when you moved to Israel, did you have a dream that you would be a face of anti-Israel propaganda?
No, I came to Israel to study in yeshiva. I was a 19-year-old kid. I didn't do a gap year like so many of my friends did. So I decided I was going to do at least my gap summer after my first year of college. So I came to Israel for the summer to study in yeshiva because I'd never been to Israel before. So I figured I want to go to yeshiva. I might as well go big or go home. So I decided to come to the source and to come to Israel. I was not from a Zionist household. I was not from a Zionist upbringing. My parents are right wing. They're proud Jews. They're not. But again, in terms of Zionism, I'm a third generation American. There was no concept of moving to Israel, coming to Israel. I'd never been to Israel before I came to Israel. I was not brought up in a house with Begin and Jabotinsky and all these people. It was not my upbringing. But no, my family's very supportive. But again, they were supportive from their perspective. And I had no idea. I came to study in yeshiva, and little by little I fell in love with the country. I decided to stay here. And again, I was still studying in a different yeshiva then, and I was not involved in politics and anything along. What actually happened was that it was at the beginning of the Second Intifada, a little bit before the Second Intifada, when literally buses were blowing up every day and Jews were being murdered in the streets and on the roads and everything else. And I saw that no one was doing anything. I saw that everyone was silent. The government was silent. The people were silent. All these ADL, not JDL, but ADL and all these alphabet, ADC, whatever they are, all these alphabet soups we like to call them, weren't doing anything. All they're doing is collecting their money and besmirching the few Jews who actually are doing things, who actually are trying to do things. And I saw there was some crazy group of Jews, one of them being Itamar Ben Gvir, Baruch Marzel, Noam Fetterman, Bentzi Gopstein, all these people. They were the ones that after every terror attack, they were out there and saying that Jewish blood is not cheap, and we're not going to tolerate terrorism against them. We're not going to sit here and be murdered. We're not going to go the sheep to the slaughter anymore. And I saw that these were the only Jews in Israel that were, as we say in Hebrew, Ritzini. They were the only serious people in Israel, the only people that cared enough about their Jewish brothers and sisters and about the state of Israel, about the country of Israel, to actually stand up and do anything. So little by little I got involved with them. At some point I left Jerusalem and I moved to Kfar Tapuach in the Shomron, which is a, so to speak, settlement, which also had a very large presence of the students of Binyamin Kahana, Rabbi Meir Kahana's son, and his students. So I lived there for a long time, and I was an activist. I was involved in activism then. I was involved in activism against the expulsion from Gush Katif. I was involved in all sorts of activism against missionaries, against all sorts of activities in Israel that are negative. And of course, this was the natural progression. I needed to leave Tapuah for whatever reason. Again, they made it like I was. Someone was trying to say, I don't know where they got this from, that basically the FBI was after me in America, so I had to flee America and move to Israel, and I came to occupy this Palestinian house. But there's no FBI, there's no nothing. No one wants. I have been in America for 20-something years. No one's after me. I didn't have to leave America. I chose to leave America for ideological reasons, for religious reasons, and I don't regret that for a second. So
you have the Arab world sending you threats and the FBI watching
there's
you.
There's no FBI. They made that up. Someone decided that for some reason I had to flee America to come to this house, and this is it's a complete false, made-up narrative. It doesn't exist.
But people believe in really stupid things.
And someone else said, who is it? One of these guys, I don't remember who it was. I saw on English TV, I don't know who it was, something. He said that I'm getting money from the owner, what's his name? Abramovich, the owner of Chelsea. I'm on his payroll.
Roman Abramovich.
Roman Abramovich is paying me to live in this house, and I'm getting money. I don't know who Roman Abramovich is. I wish. Roman Abramovich,
I know a guy who knows a guy who knows Abramovich. I can help you if you want.
You can send a check. You can get to Ari Lewis. You can get to. Believe me, I'm waiting for my check for money.
Please.
But Roman Abramovich is not. I don't know who Roman Abramovich is.
They just won Champions League. They have a lot of money now. They got it's a big check.
So we can build a soccer field in my yard. You're welcome. You can build the whole Chelsea field, even though whatever. I'd probably be more of a Man United guy, but whatever. We'll go with Chelsea or the Spurs.
You know that famous joke?
Yeah.
The Jews are fleeing the Nazis and they're on a train. There's different variations of this joke.
Yeah.
two of them are saying Tehillim, and one of them's reading a Nazi paper.
Yeah.
The other two are like, Shlomo, right? Why are you reading that Nazi paper?
Yeah.
He's like, you guys are scared, but this paper says we control the whole world. It makes you feel confident. I'm gonna read
Exactly.
this."
It's like listening to a country song backwards. Like it's I got my wife back, my car, my horse. This is alive. It's everything else. Everything's going great. Exactly. I wish half of this ridiculous propaganda they were saying was true. I wish. You know what? I hope one day that I'm on Abramovich's payroll. I hope one day that I'm part of a worldwide banking conspiracy. I hope one day that I control Hollywood.
Amen.
But right now, that's very, very far from the case. I'm not getting a penny from anyone. That needs to be said. I am not an employee of anybody. I'm not getting paid by anybody. I have not gotten a cent from the owners of this property, from the Nachlat Shimon organization. I'm not in their payroll. I am not anyone's agent. I'm doing this because I want to do it.
We're not paying you to do this interview.
No, I'm not being paid to do this interview. Nobody is paying me to do anything. And you know what? If anyone wants to pay me to do anything, I'm willing to take offers. But as of now, I'm completely doing everything by my own free will and by my own... because I decided that was the right thing to do. So people can make up stories and they can make up ridiculous things. FBI and Roman Abramovich, and I don't even know what's going to be next. It's like... It's almost laughable. Like, it's people that they need to... I don't know.
Do you want to put something out there?
The schizophrenic.
Put out another rumor out there that you would like to see?
I don't know. Maybe...
LeBron James wants you to maybe be on his team and give him
LeBron
water or
James,
something?
I don't know. Sure, I'll be LeBron to play basketball. The LeBron James basketball court, the Shimon Hatzadik, will be very happy to accept that. The kids would love it.
Right. LeBron, if you watch it, you can sponsor the court. Be interested in that.
I mean, we have Robert Kraft as a sponsor to a lot of stuff in Israel, so it's time for LeBron James.
Yeah,
now,
LeBron James can do
yeah.
it. So, again, this is the Ari Lewis Show, special guest Yaakov Fauci. What would be your solution to deal with this situation? I have my own personal take. I think part of the issue is that we're not using enough land of Israel, and that's both Jews and non-Jews. I would say maybe at most 20% of this country is being used. And when I say country, I mean the borders currently the state of Israel. You know, I know that I have eyes. You drive out to a different city, wow, look at all this land that's not being used. I would like to see more land being used. I think that would cause a lot of tensions to be lifted. That's my personal way I think to solve this problem. I'd like to get your thoughts about it.
I agree with you 100%. I always say that there's plenty of room in Israel for everybody. There's not a shortage of land. There's not a shortage of places to live. There's not a shortage of places to work. There's not a shortage of places to build. It's just, everything is so politicized. And even if you go out to Yehuda and Shomron, to the so-called West Bank, it's mostly empty. There's nothing there. Nobody is stealing anybody's houses. Nobody is stealing anybody's land. There's enough room for everybody. And again, there's different politicals. My political stance is that anybody, Jewish, non-Jewish, that wants to live in Israel, that can live in Israel under Jewish sovereignty, understand that this is the state of Israel, this is the Jewish state, this is our country, and can live here in peace, and doesn't want to overthrow us, and doesn't want to kick us out, doesn't want to drive us into the sea, and doesn't want to shoot missiles on our heads, is absolutely welcome to stay here. But again, they can't just do whatever they want. They can't just steal land. They can't. It's not on their terms. But they're welcome to be here, and they're welcome to live here in prosperity. And the Arabs in Israel do live in prosperity more than any other Arab country in the world. The Arabs are breaking down the doors to get into Israel. They don't want to get out; they want to get in because this is the place to be. This is a place where if you want to excel in life, if you want to have a normal life, you come here. So again, it's not. There's no shortage of land here. There's no refugee camps. People use that term as well. Refugee camps. So what does a person think when they refugee camp? They think it's Somalia. People who are starving that are living in tents that have no water. Go see what these refugee camps are. They might not be the most 5-star luxury hotel buildings, but they're buildings. They have water. They have electricity. They have elevators. They have windows. They're houses. They're apartment buildings. They might be slight slummy areas. Some of them. Some of them are not. But again, no Arab in Israel is a refugee that's living in the street in a tent. Doesn't exist.
It's similar to the ghettos in the States. So if you want to compare it to anything,
exactly. Yes. Yeah. Okay. It might not be Beverly Hills. No. Okay. But it's not Somalia. It's not people that are starving and dying, and it's not refugees. It's not. People remember. They think of movies. They see these things. These poor people that the Red Cross is bringing them bags of flour and what? No. People have cars and they have houses and they have internet and they live normal lives. No one's being oppressed here. No one is being occupied here. It's only the only thing that's being occupied is people's minds and people's propaganda. There's no occupation.
I mean, it's crazy to think, 2020, the year COVID-19 came out, the UN condemned Israel 6 times, and you know how many times they condemned China? 0. Don't you think there's something wrong with that picture?
There's something very wrong with that picture. And the question, I have a question, and I've always asked this question, why is Israel still in the UN? What does Israel benefit by being in the UN? Why are we, as we say in Hebrew, why do we have anything to do with this organization that solely exists? What does the UN do in the world today? All they do is condemn Israel. There's people starving, there's people dying, there's people that don't have access to medical care, there's people that don't have access to food and water. There's horrible atrocities going on and all sorts of conflicts all over the world. And they're worried about that a Jew who bought a house in 1875 now wants to evict a squatter in Jerusalem. This is the UN's major concern. This is the whole world's major concern. And it's obscene. It's really obscene that people are literally dying all around the world. People are suffering. People have diseases that can easily be cured. People have food that they can easily, if they would just get some food, if their governments would be taken out. Instead of condemning Israel, why don't you condemn all these totalitarian governments that are making the lives of the people living hells all over the world, that are killing people, that are murdering people, that are murdering dissidents, that are raping people. There are all sorts of horrible atrocities going on all over the world, and people don't want to talk about it. All they want to talk about is how Israel is aggression, and it's anti-Semitism, and it's an obsession, and it's a sick obsession, and it absolutely needs to stop. Israel should not be in the news ever. Israel is a tiny country in the Middle East.
Mathematically.
We don't have oil.
We don't
have
mathematically.
There's no reason why we should maybe get a story now and then. We should get, okay, there was a religious event, and people came to Israel, and they were fine. The Meron story, that was a horrible freak thing. Okay, that should be in the news. There's something, something terrible happens. It should be, okay, something great happens also. If something great happens, Israel comes up with a... Why is that never? Israel, you know how many medical technologies come from Israel? You know how many inventions come from Israel? You know how many technologies and science and agriculture that's exported all around the world? Why don't we talk about that? All the great things Israel is doing, how every Intel chip is made partly in Israel, how all the technologies from all these companies, like Google and all these people, Apple, they're all in Israel. They're not in Jordan, they're not in I don't know if they're in Qatar, I don't know, maybe they are, but I don't know. They're certainly not in North Korea, they're certainly not in places like this. In other these countries, in Saudi Arabia, they're not there. I don't know if it's just Intel in Saudi Arabia, maybe I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know they're not. But they are in Israel, and they're working hard in Israel, and good things are coming out of Israel, positive things. Israel really is a light to the nations. We have our problems, we have what we need to work on, absolutely. And then I'm not saying we should be immune from criticism, but constant, obsessive criticism about things that should not be criticized when there's horrible things going on in the world really is not, there's no excuse for that, and we shouldn't tolerate it, and we shouldn't even pay attention to it or play into their game.
It's interesting because people that want to boycott Israel, let's say they want to talk about this through Facebook chat. Yeah. Well, ICQ was invented by 3 Israeli teenagers.
Exactly.
So if you boycott Israel, then you can't actually post up boycotting Israel. I hope people understand that.
And their medical technologies, and their insulin, and their...
Jimmy Carter used something to save his life.
Exactly. You know how much technology comes out of Israel? They want to boycott cherry tomatoes. That's what they want to boycott. SodaStream, they want to boycott. They don't want to boycott any of the things that save their lives. They don't want to boycott the technologies. They don't want to boycott even the weapons technologies, and then the flight technologies and the aerospace technology. That they don't want to ban. They don't want to. When they need something, they come to our hospitals. They're more than happy. They beg us, the world leaders and the Gaza leaders, and their families are the first ones to get medical treatment for free in Israel. That's okay. That they're willing to take. But our cherry tomatoes, they don't want to buy, and they want to boycott us in Europe. They don't want people to buy our wine. They don't want people to buy our products.
By the way, when they boycotted SodaStream, what happened with that particular situation was there was a factory that had approximately 700 Arab workers, but that factory was boycotted because it was across the Green Line. So they took the factory and moved it somewhere else where they hired 700 Bedouins. So 700 Arabs lost their job due to a boycott of Israel.
So they shoot themselves in the foot. And again, this is what I wanted to say again. We'll go back to our neighborhood, go back to the families that are living in Shimon Hatzadik. They were offered generous compensation. They were offered $17 million many years ago, which is way, way beyond the value of the property, to peacefully vacate it. They absolutely refused that. Just 2 weeks ago, they were offered a compromise by the Supreme Court, where that despite the non-owners of the land, if they would only officially acknowledge the ownership of the land, and they would be willing to pay symbolic rent, they would be allowed to stay basically indefinitely in these houses. And again, they rejected it without even giving it the
counteroffer.
Nothing. There's no way. They're not willing. They want to play hardball, because what does that mean? They want pictures of Israeli police and soldiers throwing them out into the street and their stuff, and them crying, and the big nasty Israeli soldier standing over the poor weak Arab kid. They want this, and they're willing to put their own kids in the line of fire. They're willing to make their own families homeless just so they can besmirch Israel. So this is again, it's a horrible obsession. It's horrible political cynicism where people are willing to undermine their own best interest. They could have 10 houses by now. They could have 100 houses by now. Same thing with the Palestinian state. I'm against the Palestinian state again. I don't want anyone to say, oh, Fauci said no, he's for the Palestinian. No, I'm not for a Palestinian state. There's no such thing as a Palestinian state. There will never be a Palestinian state. But they could have had 10 Palestinian states by now. If they only would be normal, if they only would be reasonable, if they only would... They were offered everything on a silver platter. And no, they want everything because they don't want a state, they want our state. They don't want a house, they want our houses. They don't want a city, they want our cities. They want to throw us out of here. That's their goal. And it has to be said, and it can't be emphasized enough, that this is a battle for the existence of Israel and Jewish people in Israel. And there are people here that will not be satisfied until every last Jew is thrown out of here. And my neighbors are some of those people. And again, that has to be acted accordingly. It's very hard to feel sorry for a person who rejected millions of dollars in compensation, who rejected an offer by the Supreme Court which is not even legal. This court knows they don't own the house. The court knows that they're squatters. But because they don't want to see people, because Jews have mercy, and it's often misplaced mercy, but Jews are merciful people, we want to give them every opportunity to save themselves, but no, they don't want to save themselves. So it's very hard, again, to have sympathy for people who are willing to literally cut off their noses despite their faces, just to make Israel look bad.
Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show, special guest Yaakov Fauci. What would you like to see going forward? We talk about particular solutions, but as far as what you expect to happen with you personally, your safety, people writing things to you, not writing things to you, I mean, what would you like to see going forward?
First of all, I would like to see the police do their jobs. The Israeli police are extremely problematic. They are now in the neighborhood. They have been somewhat keeping the peace, but basically for weeks they've ignored an onslaught of terror against the Jewish residents of the neighborhood, of bottles being thrown, rocks being thrown, people being attacked when they're walking the streets, cars being torched, people being threatened, all sorts of graffiti. They've completely ignored almost all of it. And if a Jew dares to stand up and defend himself, if a Jew even dares to go outside, we're ushered into the house immediately for our own safety. We're not allowed to walk around in our own streets. If my neighbors want to come and visit me in my yard, the police come and they remove them from my yard, even though they have every right to be there. And they let Arabs maraud throughout the neighborhood without with complete impunity. We want the Israeli police, do your jobs. You're supposed to protect the people. This is Jerusalem. This is not some Wild West somewhere colony. This is Jerusalem, 5 minutes from police headquarters. We expect that the Israeli police will get off of their tuchuses and start doing what they're paid to do, doing their job. They're very, very effective when they want to be. The police can maintain order. They can make quiet in 30 seconds if they just have the motivation to do so, and to stop harassing the Jewish victims. Instead of arresting every Jew that dares to do something, that dares to defend himself, that there was incidents when people were being pelted with rocks and things, that their lives were literally in danger, and people shot with legal guns in the air, and they were arrested and they had the guns confiscated. In the end, the judge, thankfully there was a normal judge in Jerusalem Magistrate Court, threw it out and returned all the guns and sanctioned the police for their ridiculous behavior. He's like, it can't be in a country that you tell a victim that they can't go outside because they might be a victim of a crime, and that they get arrested because they dared to go outside when there were other people that don't want them outside. Again, people have to be punished who are aggressive here. If the Arabs want to protest, if they want to do whatever they want, they can do whatever they want, they can say whatever they want, they can act whatever they want. But there needs to be zero tolerance for violence and zero tolerance for threats and for intimidation tactics. And again, they want to protest all day and all night. Do it peacefully, do it normally, do it legally. And you can say whatever you want, but you absolutely do not have the right to attack people and to be violent. And then again, they attack us and they play the victim. That's the typical thing. Then they show the police coming in and attacking people. And so our Israeli police are storming Palestinian houses and making arrests and beating them. Why? Because you were throwing rocks at them, because you threw firebombs at them, what do you expect them to do? In a normal country, you'd be shot in the head on site. Look what's going on in America. Look what's going on there with the police. The police don't take nonsense. Anywhere in the world, if you go to Russia and you raise your hand to a police officer, what's going to happen to you? If you go to China and you make a face at a police officer, your whole family's going to disappear. So Israel, again, was too merciful to our enemies, or too merciful to lawbreakers and to people who want to create anarchy in our streets. And that's rule number one, is the police have to do their jobs. Rule number two is the courts have to do their jobs, and it's very clear here they cannot be influenced by political considerations. The law here is clear. All of the courts until this, including the recent appeal in the Jerusalem District Court, have ruled that unequivocally this is Jewish land and that we have a right to be here and they should be evicted legally and morally and ethically. So that needs to happen, and the Supreme Court needs not to drag their feet, and the Israeli government needs not to drag their feet, because even once the Supreme Court makes a decision, we see places like Khan al-Ahmar is still standing despite the Supreme Court. Again, this is another question. How does that happen? The Supreme Court rules against a Jewish settlement that's built on 3 inches of Arab land, so to speak Arab land, that wasn't even Arab land. They just made it up and decided it was their land. There's no actual documents, there's no actual things. They just said it was their land, and there was 3 inches of the thing, so it has to be demolished. And immediately, the Supreme Court goes, and they force the Israeli government to demolish it. Here we have, on the other side, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of cases of illegal things with demolition orders that are not demolished. Khan al-Ahmar has an eviction order already for years, and despite Bibi's campaign promises and everything else, and the government, it's still there. So I don't want to hear another word from anybody about anything until the government does its job and has equal enforcement for everybody. How can that be? That there's only enforcement against Jews and there's no enforcement against Arab lawbreakers. That's That's not a normal situation, and it's not a proper situation. So again, we need the police to do their jobs, we need the government to do their jobs. And again, it needs to be pointed out that don't let this be politicized, don't let this turn into an international conflict. The Jewish-Palestinian, it has nothing to do with this. It's people that two people want claim to the same property, and there's a court, and the court will decide, and that's what's going to happen. So it's that simple. It really is that simple, and it should be that simple. And the world needs to back off and let us deal with our own affairs and our own things the way we need to deal with them.
And again, another potential solution to this problem, a really good solution, is more interviews like this with me. And this is another episode of the Ari Lou Show. Came out of retirement to interview Mr. Yaakov Fauci, internationally famous, worldly famous. If you'd like to see more episodes like this, give me some sponsorship money. I can make more of this happen for you. In fact, Robert Kraft be a really good sponsor.
Roman Abramovich.
Because Robert Kraft owes me money anyway, so you might as well sponsor some of these episodes. Want to thank
Tom Brady.
Tom Brady. Tom Brady's in Tampa Bay now, though. He's got other stuff going on.
So he's busy.
But actually, this will really work because, like as Yaakov mentioned, there's so many anti-Israel media out there, websites, etc. We need to do counterbalance. We are losing the hasbara war. There is no question about that. We thank God we're winning military wars, but hasbara, we're getting our butt kicked. If you want to help with the fight against that, sponsor me and let's make more of these shows. And any final words from Yaakov Fauci?
Yes. Why we're losing the hasbara war? Because we cannot possibly win a war that we don't genuinely believe that we're the righteous ones, that we're the just ones, that we're doing what we should be doing. And we're embarrassed to say that because we're so worried about what the world's going to think, about what we're so used to being browbeaten by everybody that we have to come up with ridiculous arguments and, well, it's not like this and it's like that. Look how, no. The Jewish land belongs to the Jewish people. It was given us by God in the Torah. We have a biblical obligation to live here and to settle this land and to live in this land. We have eventually an obligation to bring all the Jews to Israel, to rebuild the third temple. And we cannot be embarrassed about this. This is our goal. This is our vision. And anybody who stands in our way is going to be pushed out of the way in one way or another. We need to not be embarrassed about that and not make any qualms and not, well, there's an argument and indigenous and it was like this and maybe like that. All sorts of crazy arguments that can easily be pushed out of the way because they're not the real crux of the issue. That this is our land, this is our place, this is our home. We've come home. We're never going to leave again. And the world and the people, other people who live here that are not part of the Jewish nation have to come to terms with that. And that's the best hasbara right there, is to tell the truth. And that's what the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, that since it says in the Torah that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people, the world cannot go against the Torah. The Torah is the fabric of creation, it's the blueprint of creation. God created the world by looking in the Torah. So if it says that in the Torah, if the Jews would only stand up and say, this is our land, this is our God, this is our religion.
Can you relate it to the first Rashi also, that the nations are coming?
They said that why did the Torah start with Bereshit, with Genesis? Why did God have to start with the whole creation of the world? And they're really the great stories in the Garden of Eden and the flood and Abraham and it's not in the Torah, but whatever. It's smashing his father's idols. It's in the Midrash. But okay, and Jacob and Rachel and Leah and all these wonderful stories. Joseph in Egypt. They're all very nice stories. So what is the Lubavitcher Rebbe said that Rashi says? The Lubavitcher Rebbe doesn't need to say. Rashi said it. But why are these stories even in the Torah? The Torah is a book of law. The Torah is a book of religion. So why is it telling us random historical stories and anecdotes, fairy tales? True fairy tales, but fairy tales nonetheless. Because he said there will be a time when the nations of the world will come and say that the Jewish people are thieves and we stole the land of the Philistines or the Canaanites or the people who sound a lot like Philistines. They have a very similar name today that they gave themselves. The word Philistine itself, anyone who knows what Philistine means like outsiders from there. Polish. They're squatters. They're not from here. They came from Phoenicia. They came from other places. They're not. So anyone who wants to call themselves something like a Philistine, Philistines have no right to be in this land whatsoever. They never had a right to be in this land. They were never from this land. So if they want to be like Philistines, I hope their end ends up like the Philistines. But again, that's the Torah approach, is that this is our land and God gave it to us, and it says so in the Torah, and we need not to be embarrassed about that. We need not to be ashamed by that. We need to get on television, we need to go in the UN and say that. Because when other nations say that, when the Arabs say that, and when they speak that way, and they talk about Al-Aqsa, and they talk about Mecca, and they talk about their holy places, they're very serious about their religion. When Christians get up and speak, they're very, very serious about their religion. When Hindus or Sikhs or whoever it is in the world, they're very, very serious about their religious beliefs, and they're not embarrassed, and they say, no, we're going to defend this. We're going to defend this to our last drop of blood, because we believe in this, and this is the truth. And almost always, when someone comes to that approach, it just, no one argues with them. Does anyone argue with Russia? When Russia goes and does crazy things in invades, no one even talks to them. Why? Because they know they don't care. There's no point to make a UN resolution against Russia. They'll laugh at it. So we should be like Russia. We should laugh at it. We should be like We should learn from our Muslim.
Well, we shouldn't be like Russia completely.
No. We should be in this aspect. Is what to learn. What does it say that who is wise? Somebody learns from
Someone else.
everybody about their level of faith and their level of dedication to their religious beliefs, even if they happen to be at odds with ours at certain times. But again, they're not embarrassed. They're not ashamed to say this is what Allah said, and this is what the Quran said, and this is what Muhammad said, and this is what other religions say they're people. And we have to say this is our Torah, this is our God, this is our lifestyle. And anybody has a problem with that, there's a very, very, very large world. But in Israel, the Torah is the law. This is our law, and this is our... And again, that's the best time. Once you start from that point, then you can go to security arguments, and national arguments, and cultural arguments, and refugee arguments, and Holocaust arguments, and there's a million and one hasbara arguments that everyone can make. But if you don't have that fundamental blueprint that this is our claim to here is a religious one, is a Torah one, is a in the foundation of the world. The whole world was created so that the Jewish people would be in the land of Israel and we would have a temple. It was the whole purpose of creation. And everything else is to facilitate that. And if we would say that and we would know that, there's a lot of Christians in the world that know this even. There's a lot of evangelical supporters of Israel who are genuine supporters of Israel who really, they understand that this is what God's plan is for the world. And fine, they're not Jews and they don't want to be Jews and they have their religious beliefs. We're not talking about religious beliefs. But again, we see that there are people who will stand up, no, it's okay. That's all right. This is true. This is fact. And there are honest Muslims in the world too that will say, no, really, Israel really should be the land of the Jews. And
I think Muhammad said that in the Quran.
I'm not an expert in the Quran, I don't know what again, but there are even modern day Islamic scholars who, if you really press them, they'll admit that. But if we don't admit it ourselves and we're ashamed and we're embarrassed, doesn't matter what anyone else is, we can't expect people to be more Catholic than the Pope. We have to be strong and we have to be proud. And if the world sees that we're strong and proud, they're going to follow suit and get in line behind us. But if not, no level of argument or hasbara or media or gimmicks or shtick is gonna help. And certainly coming on our knees and begging and being sniveling, that those days are over, and that has never worked, and that's always led to tragedy for the Jewish people. And thank God we're in a time when we don't have to do that anymore, where we are coming from a position of power, we are coming from a position of where we decide what goes on, and we are the masters of our own fate. Obviously God's the masters of our fate, but we have a lot to say about what goes on with that, and things have changed, and the world has to get used to that. Jews are no longer oppressed, Jews are no longer downtrodden, Jews no longer go like sheep to the slaughter, and we're standing up for ourselves, for our religious rights, for our national rights, for our country, and for our people. And again, anyone who wants to get in our way is going to have to move aside in one way or another.
All right, again, another episode of the Ari Lewis Show. Special thanks to Yaakov Fauci. Do you want people to message you? Do you want to give out a Facebook name or not? Or
They don't need to message me. If they want to get really in touch with me, they get in touch with me. I mean, I'm so bombarded right now that my WhatsApp was canceled, I told you. I had to make my phone so that it doesn't ring for for unknown numbers.
Wow.
Which thankfully most people don't call me anyway. They know better than to call me. But again, it's calmed down a lot. The first few days was nonstop. It was 24. Like, people were in line. I was busy to call me. And it just all sorts of countries. Let me see.
We actually called you today a couple of times.
Yeah, it wasn't busy. It's just off because you weren't in my phone book. Okay. So I have here. What do I have here? I have from Palestinian Authority, from Spain.
Okay.
I'm just saying people that have called me. From Jordan, from Oman, Tunisia, United Arab Emirates, Oman, Jordan, Egypt. I have a Bahrain somewhere. Tunisia.
You could be a businessman.
Bahrain, here. I got a Bahrain one, 973. Another United Arab Emirates. This is all in the past few days. The names. Again.
So instead,
Netherlands. I don't know who that.
Do you work for OPEC?
I work for nobody. I work for myself. Australia. I don't know what they wanted either. But Indonesia. I don't know anyone in Indonesia. I don't know anyone in Jordan. I don't know anyone in it.
So if you have comments about this video, message me. Ari Lewis, ARILOUIS. Complaints, comments. I've dealt with Jews for a long time, so I'm used to people complaining. That's fine. You want to complain about this interview, you didn't like how I did it, complain. I don't care. It's more attention, fine. Special thanks out to Svi, the producer. Did a great job today. And again, if you want more episodes like this, contact me about sponsorships, and we'll see what happens. Signing off, this is Ari Lewis. God bless. Good night.